It starts with a quiet morning, the kind that doesn't ask much of anyone. The buzz of the espresso machine hums like a low drone in the background, and the air smells faintly of cinnamon and burnt toast. The cafe isn't full, just a scattering of regulars hunched over laptops or nursing their usuals. Outside, the streets are wet from a late-night drizzle, sunlight only just beginning to peek through the gray. That's when the door swings open and an old man walks in. Stooped, slow, and dressed in a worn army jacket with faded patches and a pair of hands that tremble slightly as he tugs his cap off. His eyes scan the room, unsure, as if he's walked into the wrong decade. But then he steps toward the counter and Jess, barely 20, hair pulled back in a messy bun, sleeves rolled up and hands dusted with cocoa powder, spots him. "Good morning, sir," she says with a warmth that cuts through the chill outside. "What can I get started for you?" The old man smiles, gentle and cracked. "Just a small black coffee, if that's all right." Jess nods and turns to pour it, but something about the way he stands, one boot slightly caved in and both knees locked like it hurts to move, makes her pause. She slides the cup across the counter. "This one's on me." He furrows his brow. "You don't have to." She leans in, just a little. "No, I want to. My dad used to wear a jacket like yours. Said the coffee overseas was terrible. Let me make up for it." The man hesitates. His eyes go glassy for half a second before he nods, voice low. "Thank you, miss." Jess smiles again. "You take care now." He turns and leaves, slow and stiff, and Jess watches him go. What she doesn't see, what she couldn't possibly know, is the man in the corner booth who saw everything. J.D. Vance sits with a plain black coffee growing colder by the second, his eyes sharp behind rimless glasses. He didn't come here looking for a story. He came here for quiet. But some things speak louder than words. He saw the way Jess's hand lingered on the counter just a second too long. The way the old man's posture straightened slightly when she said, "On me." And he saw something else, too. The quick, darting glance from the shift manager in the back, who didn't like what just happened. JD doesn't say anything yet, just sips. Slow. Steady. But already, something's turning in his mind. Not because it was just a cup of coffee, but because sometimes, that's where stories begin. The moment the door chimes shut behind the old veteran, Jess barely has time to exhale before the backroom curtain snaps open like a whip. Out comes Cheryl, the shift manager, clipboard in hand, her lips pressed tight like she's been waiting for a reason. "Jess," she says, her voice sharp enough to slice through the espresso steam. "We need to talk, now." The cafe goes quiet. A spoon clinks against a ceramic cup, and someone coughs awkwardly near the window. Jess turns, wiping her hands on her apron, confusion wrinkling her brow. "Did I mess up an order?" Cheryl's eyes don't blink. She taps the clipboard with a painted nail. "You gave that man a free coffee. No override code, no transaction. That's theft under Policy 8B. Jess opens her mouth, then closes it again. "He was a veteran. It was a violation," Cheryl snaps, cutting her off. "We are not a charity, Jessica. Every item must be accounted for. You're not authorized to comp anything without approval." J.D. Vance doesn't move from his seat, but his fingers tighten around his cup. He can hear every word. His eyes are fixed on the counter, on the way Jess's shoulders shrink inward as she tries to explain. "It was a small cup of drip coffee," Jess says softly, voice shaking. "It was just one cup." Cheryl leans in, her voice dropping but not her volume. "It's not about the amount. It's about principle. You made a decision that wasn't yours to make. And this isn't the first time, is it?" Jess flinches. "What?" Cheryl lifts a sheet from the clipboard like it's a sentence. "You've been warned before. Chatting too long with customers, not keeping your station tight, using extra foam on lattes without upcharge. It all adds up. And now this?" She drops the final blow like a blade. "I'm sorry, Jess. You're done here." Silence swells in the cafe. JD watches Jess's face pale, the color draining like someone pulled a plug. She doesn't cry, doesn't argue, just stands there, stunned, her apron suddenly heavy in her hands. A young couple near the window looks away, pretending not to notice. A regular by the door stares down into his cup. No one says a word. Cheryl sighs, like she's the one burdened. I'll need your apron and your name tag before you leave. Jess unties the apron slowly, fingers fumbling with the knot. Her voice is barely above a whisper. He reminded me of my dad. Cheryl doesn't respond, doesn't care. JD watches her walk away, apron folded over one arm, head bowed but not broken. He doesn't stop her. Not yet. Not until he knows exactly what he's going to do. Because he didn't come here to get involved. But now that he is, he's not leaving until it's fixed. JD waited until the last thread of Jess's apron slipped through her fingers. Until her name tag clinked like an afterthought on the counter. Until the silence in the cafe started to itch under everyone's skin. That's when he stood. Calmly. Quietly. He walked up to the counter, the heels of his boots tapping softly against the tile floor like punctuation marks in a sentence nobody wanted to finish. Cheryl looked up, not expecting company. Her expression flickered, trying to place the man now standing in front of her. JD placed his wallet on the counter, opened it slowly, and pulled out a crisp 20. I'll pay for his coffee, he said, setting the bill down in front of her with a casual firmness that made the whole cafe stop pretending not to listen. Cheryl blinked, then gave a tight, unamused laugh. Sir, this isn't about the price, it's about the principle. JD's gaze didn't waver. Then let's talk about principles. Cheryl stiffened. She broke policy. She gave away product. We have procedures for a reason. If every employee just started handing out free drinks to whoever looked tired or wore a uniform, we wouldn't be in business by Friday. JD raised an eyebrow. So your bottom line hinges on denying a 70-year-old veteran a free cup of coffee? It hinges, she said, her voice sharp, on structure and accountability. And this conversation is over. She reached for the 20 pie, not to accept it, but to push it back toward him. JD didn't move. His hand stayed flat on the counter. You didn't have to fire her, he said, his voice low and even. A warning, a conversation. But you didn't just enforce policy, you made a scene. Jess stood a few steps behind, her backpack slung over one shoulder, frozen in place. She wasn't sure whether to thank him or tell him not to bother. No one had ever stepped in for her like this before. Not over something that mattered. Cheryl glanced around, realizing the entire cafe was watching now. Phones weren't out yet, but eyes were. JD leaned in just enough for her to feel it. Do you even know what that coffee meant to him? Cheryl's face twisted. This isn't your concern. JD smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're right, it wasn't, but now it is. With that, he picked up the 20, laid it flat beside the register again, and turned to Jess. Come on, he said, his tone gentler now. Let's get out of here. Jess hesitated, looking at the manager one last time. But Cheryl had already turned away, tapping on her tablet like nothing had happened. JD held the door open. Jess walked through it, and somewhere between the hum of the espresso machine and the hush that followed them out, the cafe lost more than just a barista. It lost its heart. Jess stood near the front door, her fingers trembling as they smoothed the fabric of her apron one last time. She folded it carefully, like it meant something more than polyester and company colors. Like it carried pieces of her. Every rushed morning, every kind smile, every time she went a little slower with someone who needed it. Her name tag was gone, her place behind the counter erased like chalk in the rain, but she couldn't bring herself to drop the apron into the bin by the register like trash. She clutched it to her chest and turned toward the cafe. Most of the customers had returned to their coffees and phones, eyes flicking up only briefly, then away again. A few had watched her get fired. Not one of them had said a word. Still, Jess offered a small, tired smile and said, "Thanks for coming in." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. That's when JD stepped beside her, his presence quiet but undeniable, like gravity. He didn't speak right away, just looked at her with a softness that made her feel seen in a way that made her stomach twist. She glanced up at him, confused, cautious. "Why'd you do it?" he asked gently, his voice low enough not to carry but steady enough to anchor her. She blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "The coffee," he said. "You didn't have to, but you did." Jess looked down at the folded apron in her hands, then out the window where the old man had disappeared into the morning. Her voice came out quieter this time, but stronger. Because he looked like my dad. JD's eyes didn't flinch. Was your dad in the service? She nodded slowly. 2 tours, Desert Storm. He passed last year. Lung cancer. She swallowed hard. Said the VA waitlist was longer than the war. JD didn't respond right away, just gave a single solemn nod. The kind men give when they understand without needing more. Then, without a word, he pulled his phone from his coat pocket, not to take a picture, not to tweet some self-righteous paragraph, but to open a blank note and type in something short. A name, a date, a place. Jess watched, confused. What are you doing? He slid the phone back into his pocket. Planning, he said simply. That wasn't just a cup of coffee you gave away. It was a moment, and some people in this world don't know how to price that, so they punish it. Jess blinked at him, unsure how to respond. JD reached into his wallet and handed her a card. No title, just a name and a number. If you ever want to work somewhere that values people over policy, call me. Jess looked down at the card, then back up at him. Why are you doing this? He gave a small, tired smile. Because you reminded me of someone too. Then he turned and walked off into the gray light, leaving Jess standing in the doorway with an apron, a card, and the first flicker of hope she'd felt in months. JD sat in the dim quiet of his study that night, a single desk lamp casting a warm circle of light over a worn leather notebook, a cold cup of untouched tea, and a phone he'd been staring at for the past 20 minutes. Outside, the world moved on like it always did. Cars hissing down wet streets, porch lights flickering to life one by one, and no sign that anything extraordinary had happened in that tiny cafe just hours ago. But JD knew better. He knew when a moment deserved more than silence. So he picked up the phone and dialed. It wasn't a flashy number, not some media line or politician's office. It was Tom Keller's number, an old friend who ran a small cafe downtown, the kind with hand-painted signs and baristas who remembered your order after one visit. Tom answered on the second ring. JD, long time. JD leaned back, his voice steady. Tom, I've got someone you need to meet. Not now. Soon. She got fired today for giving a veteran a free coffee. There was a pause, then a dry chuckle on the line. Let me guess. Big chain? Clipboard manager? You nailed it. JD's voice was flatted. But I'm not calling just to vent. I'm sending you security footage. Cafe Cam picked it up. I pulled it before I left. Wait, you were there? Front row seat. JD opened his laptop and dragged a file into an email. She didn't do it for attention. Didn't even know who I was. She just looked at a man who reminded her of her father and did something kind, and they fired her on the spot. Tom sighed. You know, we've always got room for people like that. JD hit send. I'm counting on it. They talked logistics for another few minutes. JD didn't want Jess to feel like a charity case. He wanted her to be offered a chance, a choice, something the morning had stolen from her. After they hung up, JD didn't put the phone away. He stared at it again, this time longer. He had one more call to make, one he'd been avoiding. He scrolled through his contacts and tapped a name near the top. The phone rang, once, twice. Then a familiar voice answered. JD, thought you disappeared on us. JD didn't waste time. I need a favor, quiet but fast. There's a girl named Jess who's about to be a headline for all the right reasons, or the wrong ones if we don't move first. I want her protected, hired, and if possible, heard. You want a platform? I want justice, JD replied. Not for clicks, for the kid who gave up her job for a stranger in uniform. The voice on the other end paused, then said, Send me everything. JD did, and as he closed his laptop and looked out the window at the quiet night beyond, he knew tomorrow wouldn't be the same. Not for Jess, not for that cafe, not for anyone watching when the truth came out. Jess showed up early the next morning, nerves tangled in her stomach like wires that wouldn't unknot. The address had been scribbled neatly on the back of JD's card, and something about the way he'd handed it to her. Steady, deliberate, with eyes that didn't flinch. had made her believe, just for a moment, that maybe it wasn't over. But still, walking up to the cafe now, a different one tucked between a bookstore and a bike repair shop, she felt like she was walking into something too good to be true. She pulled open the door. A bell chimed. And then she stopped. There were cameras. Not flashy news cameras, but small ones, discreetly set up. A woman in jeans and a headset gave her a quick nod from behind a light stand. At the counter, JD stood in a charcoal blazer, sleeves pushed up to his elbows, sipping coffee from a mug that clearly wasn't for show. Jess froze, unsure whether to run or apologize. JD looked up and smiled. "Jess, glad you came." Her voice was small. "Is this an interview?" "Something like that," he said, setting the mug down. "Come on up." She stepped forward slowly, her eyes flicking between the cameras and the warm, quiet cafe that smelled like vanilla and fresh bread. "What is all this?" JD didn't answer right away. He gestured to the stool at the end of the counter. "Have a seat." She sat, still clutching her bag like it might shield her from whatever came next. JD leaned on the counter, his tone easy but precise. "Yesterday, you got fired for doing something most people wouldn't think twice about. You gave a man in uniform a cup of coffee. You didn't ask for credit. You didn't post about it. You just did it." Jess looked down. "It was just a cup of coffee." "No," JD said, his voice firmer now. "It was a choice. And the world needs more people who choose compassion when no one's watching." Jess blinked, unsure how to respond. "I didn't even know who you were." JD chuckled. "That's part of why I'm here." He straightened up. "My name's JD Vance. I work on a few things: policy, advocacy, rebuilding systems that forgot what decency looks like. But this morning, I'm just someone who wants to offer you a job." Jess stared at him, eyes wide. "A job?" JD nodded toward the back. "This cafe is run by a friend of mine. He believes in second chances, and in kindness that doesn't need permission. You'd be a great fit here." Jess opened her mouth, then closed it again. "Why me?" JD's gaze didn't waver. "Because you did the right thing when it cost you something. And that's the kind of person I want on any team." A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. JD offered a napkin, no spotlight, no applause. Just a quiet offer. "You in?" Jess nodded, voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, I'm in." And just like that, a new chapter began. It started with a blurry screenshot, the kind people scroll past 100 times a day until they don't. Someone from inside the original cafe had leaked it, maybe a barista with a conscience, maybe a customer who saw too much. Either way, it was out now. An internal email dated 3 weeks before Jess was fired, from Cheryl herself. Subject line, "Performance concern, Jess M." The words that followed were sharper than any policy. Jess continues to exhibit overly emotional behavior during shifts. She often engages veterans in extended conversation, which slows down the line. Her tone is sympathetic in ways that don't reflect our brand standards. Consider reviewing if she's a long-term fit for the team. The screenshot spread like wildfire. At first, just a handful of retweets and quietly furious comments. But by lunchtime, it had hit the front page of local news. Then national. People weren't just mad. They were gutted. Videos of veterans reacting to the story began popping up. One teared up in uniform, saying, "When I got back home, nobody looked me in the eye. If someone like Jess had offered me a smile and a cup of coffee, I would have remembered that for the rest of my life." The internet did what it does best. It connected dots, built timelines, and amplified what mattered. And when someone dug up Cheryl's LinkedIn profile, her job title trended for all the wrong reasons. Meanwhile, JD sat in his office watching the chaos unfold, not with satisfaction, but with a kind of measured stillness. He didn't gloat, didn't write a thread, just posted one line, a black screen with white text. "Sometimes kindness gets punished. We just made sure it didn't stay that way." The post went viral in under an hour. Celebrities weighed in. Veterans groups released statements. Even a few congresspeople chimed in. But none of it changed the look on Jess's face when JD showed her the post. She wasn't angry. She wasn't triumphant. She was quiet, thoughtful. "I didn't want her to be ruined," she said softly. "I just wanted to matter." JD nodded. "You do, and you always did. That's the part they couldn't see." Jess looked down at her phone, where strangers from across the country were now flooding her inbox with messages of support. Some offered jobs. Others offered coffee. But most just said thank you. Thank you for being the person you didn't have to be, for treating someone like he mattered, for doing it even when no one was watching, until they were. Cheryl never released a statement. The company did, something vague and corporate about reviewing internal practices. But it didn't matter anymore. The world had already moved. And Jess wasn't a footnote. She was the reason it moved in the first place. The bell above the door gave its usual soft ring as another customer stepped into the cafe. And Jess, wiping her hands on a towel behind the counter, didn't look up right away. It was just after the lunch rush, the air still thick with the smell of toasted bread. And cinnamon. And her hands were busy restocking the pastry case. But something in the silence that followed made her glance up. The world seemed to pause for a beat. Standing just inside the doorway was the old man in the army jacket, the same one she'd served that quiet morning, the one who had unknowingly cost her a job and changed her life. His jacket looked the same, though a little cleaner, and he held his cap in his hands with the same reverence one might hold a photograph. His eyes scanned the cafe slowly until they landed on her. Jess's breath caught in her throat. She stepped out from behind the counter without a word, the towel still in her hand, her apron dusted with flour. He started to speak, but his voice broke before he could finish the first word. She saw the tears welling in his eyes, saw his shoulders trembling not with age, but with something deeper. "I didn't know," he finally managed, voice cracking like dry wood. "They said you lost your job because of me." Jess shook her head immediately, closing the distance between them. "No," she said softly, her voice thick but clear. "Because of them, not you." He looked down at the cap in his hands, clutching it tighter. "I just wanted to thank you for seeing me, for giving me more than coffee that day." She didn't wait for another word. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, careful not to squeeze too tightly, but with enough warmth to let him feel what words couldn't carry. The cafe was quiet around them. Customers glanced over, a few lowering their phones respectfully. JD sat in the corner booth, the same one from that first day, a book open in front of him, untouched. He didn't film, didn't speak, just watched with a quiet pride, knowing this moment wasn't his to claim. The old man pulled back slightly, eyes glassy but grateful. "You remind me of my daughter," he said, voice trembling. "She passed 2 winters ago. But you made me feel like she was still here for a minute." Jess held his gaze. "Then I'm glad I did." He pressed something into her hand then, a small medal, worn and smooth from years of carrying. This was hers. She'd want you to have it. Jess looked down, overwhelmed, her throat tight. She nodded, unable to find the words. The old man turned, walked slowly toward the door, and left without fanfare. JD caught her eye as she turned back toward the counter. He didn't say anything. He just gave her a nod. And in that moment, nothing needed to be said. It wasn't flashy, not in the way people expected when they thought of going viral. There were no balloons, no grand reopening signs, no influencers with cameras perched on tripods waiting for a perfect reaction. There was just a wooden sign, hand-carved and hung behind the register with 2 brass screws. It read in simple black lettering, "Veterans drink free. No fine print, no asterisks, no limits." Jess stood behind the counter, tying her new apron in a double knot, the weight of it finally feeling like it fit. Her name tag was different now, cleaner, heavier, etched in metal instead of plastic, and the air around her didn't buzz with tension. It felt like breathing again. Customers filtered in steadily, some curious, some loyal. A few new faces drawn in by the quiet whisper of a place that had chosen heart over handbook. Most glanced at the sign and nodded with something like approval. But the veterans, they paused. Sometimes their eyes lingered longer than expected. Sometimes they'd clear their throat and look down, not trusting their voice to hold. One old man in a navy hat whispered, "Thank you," and slipped a $5 bill into the tip jar anyway. Jess smiled every time, not out of obligation, but because it felt like she was finally giving something back that mattered. It was mid-morning when the door opened and JD walked in. No entourage, no announcement, just him and the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to explain why he came. Jess saw him and straightened, brushing her hands against her apron. "Hey," she said, her smile widening without effort. JD stepped up to the counter, looked at the menu he already knew by heart, and pointed to the drip blend. "Same as before." Jess nodded, poured the coffee, and slid it across to him. JD pulled out his wallet, dropped a 20 on the counter, and when Jess reached to make change, he stopped her with a glance. "I paid double where the values are right." She hesitated, then smiled again, softer this time. "You don't have to do that." "I know," JD said, taking the cup, "but you didn't have to do what you did either, and you still did it." He turned to leave, but paused, looking up at the new sign behind her. "That's a good policy." Jess followed his gaze. "It's not just a policy," she said, "it's a promise." JD gave her a nod, the kind that meant something was finished but not forgotten, and walked out into the morning sun. Jess watched him go, heart steady now, not pounding with fear, but filled with something she hadn't felt in weeks: belonging. And behind her, the sign stayed up, catching light through the front windows, a quiet reminder that kindness didn't need permission. It just needed the courage to stand. The locker was still there, buried in the back of her tiny apartment closet, wedged behind a stack of boxes labeled with scribbled memories. Winter coats, college books, Dad's letters. Jess hadn't opened it in weeks. Not since that morning she walked out of the old cafe, apron in hand and dignity hanging by a thread. But today felt different. Not because anything big had changed, but because she had. She knelt on the floor, pulled the locker open with a creak, and stared at what was left inside. Her old apron lay there, folded once but creased from being clutched too tightly, too long. The fabric still smelled faintly like hazelnut syrup and burnt espresso. The name tag was still pinned to the chest, though slightly crooked. Jess, shift lead, the title they gave her without the respect to match. For a moment, she just looked at it. All the memories poured in at once. The early shifts, the missed lunch breaks, the way Cheryl's voice could twist something kind into something wrong. And that final moment, the coffee, the smile, the old man's grateful eyes, and the cost that came right after. Her fingers hovered over it. She didn't cry, not anymore. She'd done that already. What she felt now wasn't sorrow. It was clarity. Jess picked it up gently, ran her hands over the threads, and then walked it to the kitchen table, where a cardboard box waited. On the lid, written in thick black marker, were 2 words: "Never again." She didn't throw the apron away. She didn't tear it or burn it like a movie might tell her to, because it wasn't just a symbol of what had gone wrong. It was a reminder of who she had been, of who she'd refused to stop being. She folded it carefully, smoothed it flat, and placed it inside. Then she closed the box, sealed it with a strip of tape, and slid it back under her bed. Not forgotten, just finished. Her phone buzzed a few minutes later. A message from the new cafe. They were short a barista for the afternoon rush. Could she cover? Jess smiled, grabbed her keys, and slipped into her new apron. This one was thicker, softer, with deep pockets and a stitched heart logo just above her name. No clipboard manager. No eyes waiting for her to fail. Just a place that let her be exactly who she was. As she stepped out into the sunlight, Jess didn't look back. Not at the closet, not at the past. She walked forward, steady and sure, her reflection catching briefly in the glass door of the cafe as she pulled it open. She didn't see a girl who got fired for kindness. She saw a woman who turned that moment into something more. Stronger, seen, and no longer quiet. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness is the one that echoes the loudest. Jess didn't set out to go viral. She didn't know her story would be shared, debated, and remembered. She just saw a man who reminded her of someone she loved, and chose to treat him with dignity. And in a world that often moves too fast to notice, she slowed down. She paid attention. And that made all the difference. JD didn't step in to be a hero. He saw something worth protecting and made sure the rest of us saw it too. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe kindness should never cost someone their job, and that compassion still belongs at the center of our communities, then stay with us. Subscribe to the channel because we're telling more stories like this. Stories that remind us who we are at our best. Stories where decency wins. One moment, one coffee, one choice. That's all it took. Be here for the next one. Subscribe now.